We have to start off with a basic review of the smallest possible example of a square root in the denominator. So we'll start with 3 over the square root of 2. You cannot have a radical term in the denominator. It is not simplified. So to get it out of the denominator, you have to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 2, which is what appears on the bottom. When you do that, you have 3 square root of 2 on the top. And then on the bottom, you have something that many people struggle with. If you have square root of 4 times square root of 4, the answer is 4. Square root of 3, square root of 3, the answer is 3. When you multiply a square root by itself, it's just the number under the sign. So in this case on the bottom, square root of 2 times square root of 2 is just 2. So it's 3 square root of 2 over 2. This one is 4 square root of, or actually 4 over square root of 3. And to get the square root of 3 off of the bottom, you must multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 3. So you end up with 4 square root of 3 over 3. The next one is 6 over the square root of 8. Now you should notice that the square root of 8 is not simplified. Not only is it in the bottom, but it can also itself be simplified. But you don't have to do that yet. Just multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 8 to get 6 square root of 8 over 8. And now once you make it to that point, you can break up the square root of 8. You can make it square root of 4, square root of 2, and then simplify to get 6 times 2 square root of 2 over 8, which would be 12 square root of 2 over 8. But as always, you can still simplify your fractions if they have a common number or a common factor. You can divide 12 by 4 to get 3 and 8 by 4 to get 2. So the whole thing turns out to be 3 square root of 2 over 2. Square root of 16 over square root of 8. You have a square root in the denominator, but if you also have one in the numerator, you might want to see if you can reduce them. A square root over a square root can be written like this, as if it were just one fraction. You don't need to write it like this. You can simply do it as it is. 8 goes into itself once, and into 16 twice. What's the square root of 1? 1, so square root of 2 over 1 is just square root of 2. And in this case, that is the simplified answer of square root of 16 over square root of 8. Had you multiplied top and bottom by the square root of 8 and went on from there, you would have done a lot more work. This step is unnecessary, and so is this. So in reality, you could just look at that and come up with this without any work to show at all. Here's another one. This one is the square root of 12 over the square root of 20. Is there something that goes into both 12 and 20? What's the highest number? 4. So if I chop these down by 4, I have square root of 3 over square root of 5 left. Now I can't reduce that any further, but I can get rid of the square root in the bottom by multiplying the top and the bottom by the square root of 5. On the top, when you multiply 2 square roots together, you get, in this case, square root of 15. And on the bottom, you end up with simply a 5. The square root of 15 can't be simplified, and there's no number to cancel with the 5 on the bottom, so this is it. Square root of 6 over square root of 10. Is there something that goes into both 6 and 10? 2. So if we chop these down by 2, we get square root of 3 over square root of 5. So now in this case, we have nothing that we can do except to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 5 and be left with square root of 15 over 5. 3 square root of 2 over 4 square root of 6. Make sure there's nothing that can be simplified before you start multiplying the top and the bottom by a radical term. Can I simplify square root of 2 over square root of 6? Yes. If I do that, 2 into itself once, which means that this just cancels out. And I'm left with a 3 on the top, 4 on the bottom, and 2 into 6 3 times. So I have 3 over 4 square root of 3. We have to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 3 to get it out of the bottom. And when we do that, on the top we have 3 square root of 3. On the bottom we have 4 times 3, which is going to be 12. But even before you get a 12, wouldn't it make more sense to do this and just have square root of 3 over 4? This one is 6 square root of 5 over 5 square root of 8. Is there anything I can do to simplify this before I start getting the radical term off the bottom? No. So just multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 8 to come up with 6 square root of 40 over 5 times 8, which is really going to be a 40 on the bottom. Now we have multiple things we can simplify. You have 6 over 40, and then plus you have the square root of 40. So let's take care of the square root of 40 first and break it up as 4 and 10. And then on the bottom we keep our 40. Square root of 4 is 2. And simplify the top to have 12 square root of 10. On the bottom you still have 40. Now we can start canceling the fraction. 4 will go into 12 3 times and into 40 10 times. So 3 square root of 10 over 10 is your final answer. We can reduce the radical terms first. You can take a 4 out of both of them and come up with 4 square root of 3 over 3 square root of 2. Multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 2 to come up with 4 square root of 6 over 3 times 2, which of course is going to be a 6 on the bottom. And simplify the 4 over 6 to get 2 square root of 6 over 3. This problem can go by quickly if you simplify the radicals first, top to bottom. Square root of 3 will go into itself once. So you're just left with a 9 on top. On the bottom, the square root of 3 goes into the square root of 12, square root of 4 times. But the square root of 4 is a perfect square, which is 2. So you have a 9 over 6, which changes to 1 and 3/6, which is 1 1/2. You could have also 3 over 2 as well, this or this. We can simplify a little bit first. You can take out a square root of 4 from the 20 and the 12 to be left with square root of 5 and then square root of 3. Of course, the 10 and the 3 keep their positions. Now we'd have to multiply the top and the bottom by a square root of 3 to get 10 square root of 15 over 3 times 3, which would be a 9 on the bottom. And there's nothing else you can do to simplify this. You can simplify this here and here to start with, because 6 over 18 simplifies to square root of 1 over square root of 3. And remember, you can only simplify square roots with each other. You can't do something like this 2 and then the square root of 6. So on the top, we just have a 5 now. And we're going to have to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 3. So 5 square root of 3 over 2 times 3 is 6. So that's your final answer.